For those that don't know me, I'm James Cornelius. My friends call me JR, and I'd love for y'all to call me JR. I'm a grateful believer and follower of Jesus Christ, and I'm grateful because I struggled with addiction to many different substances and things for 29 years. Then, by the power of God, I was set free from the slavery of addiction. I have been clean for 5 years, and it has been the best 5 years of my life.
Amen.
Since I was in addiction for 29 years, I can stretch my story out for hours, so I hope you're comfortable. Just kidding. I will keep it short, as I possibly can. My life has been changed by the Word of God and by hearing two testimonies in my life. One testimony was when I was 12, and the other when I was 44 years old. A testimony is an account or story of how something happened. Today I'm going to tell a story of how God changed my life with those two testimonies, and I'm going to tie in the Prodigal Son. And the reason I tie in the Prodigal Son is because I relate to the Prodigal Son big time. And so I'm going to read the Prodigal Son, so in case anybody hasn't ever heard the Prodigal Son, I'm going to read it right quick. He also, this is Jesus talking, it's a parable that Jesus told. He said, a man had two sons. The younger of them said to his father, give me my share of the estate I have coming to me. So he distributed the assets to both of them. Not many days later, the younger son gathered together all he had and traveled to a distant country where he squandered his estate in foolish living. After he spent everything, a severe famine struck that country, and he had nothing. Then he went to work for one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into the fields to feed pigs. He longed to eat his fill from the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one would give him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, how many of my father's hired workers have more than enough food? And here I am dying of hunger. I'll get up, I'll go to my father, and I'll say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired workers. So he got up, went to his father, but while the son was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran, threw his arms around his neck, and kissed him. The son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father told his servants, quick, bring out the best robe, put it on him, put a ring on his finger, and sandals on his feet. Then bring the fattened calf, slaughter it, and let's celebrate with a feast. Because this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So they began to celebrate. You know, this parable tells the story of a son's sin against the father, and the father's great love, forgiveness, and welcoming of the son with great rejoicing. The father represents God in this parable. It is the last of three parables that Jesus gave in response to the Pharisees complaining that Jesus welcomed and ate with sinners. The parable of the lost sheep, the parable of the lost coin, and the parable of the lost son reveal the depth of God's love, the extent which he takes the initiative to recover his own. To recover something is to find or regain possession of that which was lost or stolen. It is also a return to normal state of health, mind, and strength. The definition of recovery is the same as those. God is in the business of recovering that which was lost. Before getting on with how my story ties in with the lost son, I want to define the son's sin. Now, it was not all that uncommon for a son to ask for his inheritance back in those days. And if you pay attention in verse 12, it says that the father distributed the assets to both of them. So the older son got just the same thing as the younger son did. So I don't believe that was his sin against the father. Most people believe it was blowing the inheritance on while living. But that was his sin against heaven. But if you look at what the older brother says, you can see what the real sin against the father was. In Luke 15:29, the older brother replies to the father, look, I have been slaving many years for you, and I have never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me a goat so that I could celebrate with my friends. In ancient Israel, the sons worked under the father's authority and helped build the father's empire. They usually gladly did this because they knew they were building up what they would inherit. The younger brother had left the father's authority. He did not want to be an obedient son and serve the father. He believed that living in the world on his own had more benefits than living under the father's care and authority. He had no intention of returning. He wanted to be his own boss, his own authority, and ruled by no one, not having to follow orders of the Father. I became the son of my Father in heaven at age 12. I realized I was a sinner and needed a Savior, so when my youth pastor gave his testimony, that's the first testimony, of what Christ had done in his life, I gave an invitation. I accepted that invitation and surrendered my life to Christ. He became my Lord and Savior. The Spirit of God came into my life and I was on fire. I went around telling my friends about the gospel, ended up leading 2 of my friends to the Lord. I loved reading God's Word, and by age 13, I felt like God was calling me into ministry, maybe to even be a pastor, to serve Him. I started telling people that I wanted to be a preacher. A family member discouraged me by saying, you know, preachers don't make much money, and they have it rough. At first, I did not let it discourage me, but the seeds were planted. Over the next couple of years, I went to a couple Christian youth seminars and continued to read and study my Bible, but as time grew on, some legalistic Christian views was pushed on me, and the luster of serving the Lord wore off. I began to want to fit in with the cool crowd at school. I wanted to be accepted by my peers. I became rebellious. I wanted to do what I wanted to, when I wanted to, where I wanted to, how I wanted to, with who I wanted to. Notice how I said that so fluently? That was actually my motto. I would walk around saying, I'm going to do what I want to, when I want to, where I want to, how I want to, with who I want to. By age 17, I was no longer living with my parents. Before age 16, I was an honor roll student, had a wonderful family, everything a normal country boy would have wanted to have. I would have had a chance at a prosperous life, but I gave it up so I could be free. And I will say I was from a divorced family, but I don't blame my addiction on their divorce, because I know many people who come from divorced families who didn't turn to addiction. At least, you know, I gave it all up so I could be free, and at least that's what I thought I was going to get, freedom. So this is probably what the prodigal son was thinking too. He did not have to follow the father's rule or respect his authority if he did not live within the father's household. His desire got the best of him, and now as I look back on my life, my fleshly desires got the best of me. This is how we actually, all of us, relate to the prodigal son and the lost son in a lot of ways. The fact that we want to be our own bosses in our lives. We naturally have the sin desire not to submit to the Father's will. And that's actually the original sin. You know, they wanted to be their own gods. I'll be just like God. Naturally, we want to seek our will and the things of this world that we think will make us happy and fulfilled. Running away from God starts with a sense of feeling free, but it ends in utter misery. You may feel free in the beginning, but this is only temporary. This is the way it was for the lost son and for me. In verse 14, Jesus says, after he spent everything, a severe famine struck that country and he had nothing. By the time I was 18, I was addicted and had become a drug dealer to supply my habit. I was working and slaving for this habit. This is exactly what happened to the lost son. In verse 15 it says, then he went to work for one of the citizens of that country who sent him into the field to feed the pigs. He began to work for one of the citizens of that country. Some translations say that he got attached to another person. And basically what it's saying is he attached himself to a citizen of that country. When we become detached from God, we end up being attached to something else. And that's what happened to me. I became unattached to God and got attached to something else. This slaving for the world can be done in more ways than addiction. One can slave to money, slave to materialistic things, slave to attention, and the list goes on. And the reason I know the list goes on is because I did a lot of different things. But as for me, I became a slave to my fleshly desires, desires for drugs, alcohol, desires to be wanted by females, desires to have the things of this world. A few months before I turned 19, I realized I was on a path that I did not want to be on. You know how you end up going, this is not good. Went too far. So I sought help. I was sent to my first treatment center. There I was told I needed to admit that I was powerless over my addiction and my life was unmanageable. I was told I needed to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity, and that I needed to turn my will and my life over to the care of God as I understood Him. But the problem with that is that I developed a deistic idea of God, that He cared enough to send His Son to die on the cross, but He just sits up there waiting until the second coming, and just sits up there and don't do nothing actively with His creation, is what I thought. I thought that there was no miracles that would happen in life. Throughout my addiction, I occasionally prayed to God, occasionally read His Word, especially while I was in jail, and occasionally attended church, but I did not believe that He would help me with my addiction. Although at this first treatment center, I was told once an addict, always an addict. My first initial thought was, why even try? When they told me that. If I'm going to have to continue to go to AA and NA meetings the rest of my life and constantly be in contact with a sponsor and a support group the rest of my life, why try? But I thought, I will try to do this. Notice that I said, I will try to do this. I got out of treatment and went to a halfway house for a few months and continued to go to meetings. But when I eventually left the halfway house, I quit going to meetings. Before a year was up, I was back to drinking and drugging. But in the beginning, I was doing it a whole lot less so that I could hide it. And before, I didn't care if I hid it. But you see, addiction is progressive. It doesn't get better. By the time I was 21, I was spiraling out of control again and attempted suicide by hanging myself from a ceiling fan. It was by the grace of God that someone seen me dangling. They actually heard the chair kick out, and they came in there to see what the thump was, and held me up till I came back to conscious and screamed at me until I removed the belt from my neck. Off to a treatment center again I went, but this time they worked on me with my emotions. I came out and stayed clean for a while, but it did not last because I had only turned the drugs over to God, but I had not turned my lust, my low self-esteem, my anxiety, and the such over to God. Without addressing those other issues, I slipped back into addiction. I became a functioning drug addict who occasionally dealt drugs when I had hard times in my life. Over the next 20 years, I would hold good jobs that supported my habits and my family. But I only kept my family the first half of those 20 years. I ended up leaving my wife and kids so that I could fulfill the desires of my flesh. Remember when I introduced myself, I said that I was addicted to many things? One of those was women. And instead of addressing the issue, I figured the best way to solve the problem of cheating on my wife was I'm going to get a divorce. That's the way I controlled my life. I had come to accept that I was going to be addicted and I was going to be this way till I died. The best I could do was switch from one substance to another substance. While working as a grocery manager at Food Line, I had switched from drugs to alcohol so that I could pass drug tests. Then around age 39, I discovered synthetic marijuana. I could do it and pass drug tests. The problem is, I had drunk alcohol long enough that I was now strongly addicted to it. Problem solved, I'll just do both. Shortly after this, Food Lines in Kentucky closed down and I drove unemployment for 6 months and I was a full-time drunk. That's exactly what I was. Then I worked in a couple factories till I landed as a job as an assistant manager at a grocery store. But that only lasted for a little less than a year because I was fired for smelling like alcohol when I came into work in the mornings. What did I revert to? Being a drug dealer. I started selling synthetic. It was also during this time that one evening I was intoxicated and walked in on someone smoking meth. And I was like, what are you doing? They told me, and I was like, well, let me try it. Alcohol was always my gateway drug. Every time I tried something new, I was drunk. Around this time, I started to realize that over the course of 29 years, I had seen God protect me, save me from various accidents, mishaps, and combinations of drugs that should have gave me a heart attack. And I started thinking that He was keeping me alive for something. And that was when I started realizing God actually did things on this earth, when I started realizing He was keeping me alive. It was also during this time that I started to realize how unsatisfied I was with my life. I remember hearing a Christian song one night, sitting down and just crying, and telling God I was so sorry for running from my calling, and if the rapture happened not to take me, I was not worth standing in His presence. I would just stay and preach to those left behind. There was no satisfaction in anything this world had to offer me. The lost son came to this point too. He longed to eat the field from the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one would give him anything. This world ends up leaving you unfulfilled, hungry, and thirsty. There was no satisfaction in my life. I was still believing that there was no hope for me. Once an addict, always an addict. I was only partially coming to my senses. Verse 17 tells us that when he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired workers have more than enough food, and here I am dying of hunger?" At age 43, I'd seen enough to know that those that were following the will of God and seeking His kingdom in their life had it way better than I did. And I remember sitting there thinking that people that followed God had it way better than I did. But I was all whacked out of my mind, and the only plan I had was that I knew I would probably die in my addiction. I was decided, but I was not yet committed. The lost son, he actually formulated a plan. He said in verse 18, "I'll get up and go to my father's house and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight, and I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired workers.'" Because I believed once an addict, always an addict, I had no plan. I was a man with no hope. Why take a step forward towards the Father just to fall on my face as previous times before that I had tried? Little did I know, this way of thinking was fixing to be changed by God. On Friday night, June the 12th, 2015, I was partying and selling at a house in Mount Vernon when I was alerted that the police was coming. I took off on foot to go to another house down the road, but when I went across the street, I saw the police coming down the road. So I backed up, hid in a bush, but a neighbor saw me crawl up in it and told the police that I crawled up in the bush. I was so intoxicated when I crawled up in that bush that I fell asleep. When they dragged me out of the bush, they found scales, paraphernalia, baggies, synthetics, and an AK-47 in my possession. I was charged with wanton endangerment of a police officer, which is a felony, plus all the misdemeanor charges that I had. The felony charge was basically a holding charge because I was asleep and no one was endangered except myself. But see, the week before I'd been caught with synthetic and paraphernalia, and all they could do is hold me for 12 hours. So I'm sure this was their way of holding me for longer than 12 hours. I was so exhausted from being up on meth for days that I slept from Friday to Monday morning in jail. Monday evening, the 15th of June, a jailer came around and asked if anyone wanted to attend a church service. I figured it would be nice to get out of the cell and stroll around a little bit, so I went. I don't remember any passage that preacher preached from. All I remember is his testimony. He told me how he had been an alcoholic and how God had delivered him from the bondage of it. I can't say I'd never heard this before, but I can say for the first time I believed it. I believed that God had been acting in my life, and I believed that God had the power to restore me to sanity. I believed that God was waiting for me to come to my senses and come back to Him. So in the prodigal son in verse 20, so he got up, he went to his father, but while the son was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran, threw his arms around his neck, and kissed him. I believe that's what God, my Father, was doing for me. He was just waiting to see me coming towards him so that he could run towards me and throw his arms around me and welcome me home. I got down on my knees and cried out to God. I prayed, God, I'm not worthy for nothing. I am so sorry that I have sinned against you and been running from your calling. I believe that you can restore me. Please put me right back where I was before I walked away from you. Amen. 3 things happened that moment simultaneously. First, I had no withdrawals from that moment on. Even though I'd been drinking for over 10 years, at least a pint a day, 5 years of smoking synthetic, and over 6 months of smoking meth, I had 0 withdrawals from that moment on. I was physically healed. That's one reason an atheist can't tell me there ain't a God. I've experienced them. Second, when you come off of long-term drugs and alcohol use, your brain is in a fog. Your reasoning and thinking are hindered by cloudy thinking. But at that moment, I had an experience that I can only explain as a miracle of God. The fog was gone instantly, lifted. I started thinking clearly. My memories came back. Bible verses started flooding into my brain. Where they were located started flooding back to my brain. I was mentally restored. I will talk to you about the third thing that happened to me in a minute. But first, let's look at how this compares to the lost son and how it was not jailhouse religion. The lost son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight, and I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. The son had a godly repentance, a repentance such as that he realized that he had sinned against heaven and the Father. 2 Corinthians 7:10 tells, for godly grief or sorrow produces a repentance that leads to salvation without regret, but worldly grief produces death. He was sincerely sorry that he had sinned. It was not sorry that he had gotten himself in a rough spot. When I was down on my knees crying out to God, I was sorry that I had sinned against him. I was sorry I had walked away from him and tried living life on my own power. I was sorry I had not sought his will in all the areas of my life. The thoughts of being sorry that I was in jail was not even going through my mind. I deserved to be in jail. I was not worried about how long I was going to be there. I was only worried about how I stood with God. I wanted to do my best to stand in his will. I committed to try to do what he wanted me to, when he wanted me to, where he wanted me to, and with who he wanted me to. My outlook changed. The third thing that happened at that instance of crying out to God was I was forgiven. I was justified. My relationship with God was restored. It was just as if I'd never walked away. I'm so thankful we serve a God of second, third, and more chances. He's a forgiving and loving God. But the father told his servants, quick, bring the best robe, put it on him, put a ring on his finger, sandals on his feet. He did just not accept the son back. He lifted him up and standing. James 4:10 tells us, humble yourselves before the Lord and he will exalt you. He gives us right to be called his sons and daughters if we are willing to make him Lord of our lives. We just need to humble ourselves and realize I can't do it on my own and ask for his help. God is a good father, and a good father wants to take care of his children. You see, I may have been sold the lie, once an addict, always an addict. But the truth is, once a child of God, always a child of God. Philippians 1:6 tells us, God will bring to completion the good work that he started in his children. In verse 23 and 24, Jesus told in a parable, then bring the fattened calf, slaughter it, and let's celebrate with a feast, because this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found, so they celebrated. I bet on June the 15th, 2015, there was a celebration going on in heaven. The lost son had returned. I was good as dead before that day. My mother came to visit me that week, and the moment when she seen me, she smiled big and said, I have my son back. I had not even said a word to her. How did she know? She looked at me and knew I was in my right mind. I had several people after getting out of jail tell me that I had a glow about me. I'd really like to think that it was because I was touched by the Spirit while I was in jail. Anyhow, my family was rejoicing that I had returned. On June the 23rd, I was released from jail, and Mom asked me to go to celebrate recovery with her. So I did. And the moment I walked in Celebrate Recovery, I had this feeling come over me that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. And I had prayed for God to lead me where He wanted me to go. Celebrate Recovery, as you know, is a 12-step program, but it's also a discipleship program, the discipleship that I actually lacked in my life growing up. I began to finally get the discipleship that I needed to know how to walk a Christian life, address the underlying issues and character defects that caused me to turn to drugs and alcohol in the first place. And this is why I always talk about the steps. Do the steps, work the steps, work the steps, work the steps. Because they are what helps you work on the underlying issues. And if you do not work them underlying issues, you got problems. You're going to either eventually fall, or you're just going to be unhappy the rest of your life. I started attending Sunday school, church, and Bible study at Northside Baptist Church. I made Bible reading and prayer a daily part of my life. And these things have made all the difference in my life. These are part of working the steps right there. Prayer and Bible reading. I began to have a relationship with God that was more like falling in love than something to believe in. It was more like losing my heart than giving my allegiance to Him. You see, before, all religion ever did was made a sinner of me with a stone tied to my feet. But falling in love with Jesus, that's what set me free. Since I started relying on God to guide my life, He has worked many things out in my life. I was exonerated of the felony charges, which was a blessing. And I'd been praying and praying while I was exonerated of felony charges 6 months later. And I've been praying and praying, God, please let me have my AK-47 back. Please let me have my AK-47 back. Please let me have my AK-47 back. And people kept telling me, you ain't getting your gun back. You can forget it. You was caught with drugs, you ain't getting your gun back. And I kept saying, well, God wants me to get my gun back, I'll get my gun back. And I kept praying. And about 5 months after I had got charged with that and stuck in jail, I was in a bind. When you first get out of jail and you're trying in recovery and you got all these things pending and stuff, it's kind of hard to get a job. And I was in a bind for money, and I needed money. And I still had 4 30-round magazines and a 75-round drum that I could sell and get me some money. And I was about to go get them things. And this small voice said, if you sell those, you don't trust me. I said, okay, I ain't selling them. 6 months I was exonerated. And I went up to the police station. I said, walked in there and I said, Brian, I've been exonerated of my felony charges. I would like to have my property. And I didn't say gun, I just said I would like to have my property. Because he had multiple things of mine. Phone and all kinds of things. And needless to say, he typed on a computer without saying a word. It was almost the weirdest moment in my life I could ever sit there. Because he just sit there and typed. Did not say a word to me. And then he just got up, walked back to the back, and I heard a gun safe open up. Well, I heard a safe open up. And I promise you, I started crying. It's like I was everything I could do to hold back. And he come walking out there with my AK-47, 2 30-round magazines, and the bullets set in a bag, and handed them to me. And it was an answered prayer from God. And I still don't know why God let me have my AK-47 back, other than ask. He will do things. Because I know multiple people who got charged with less things and did not get their guns back. He restored my relationship with Melissa after 13 years of being separated. The wife, the mother of my kids, he restored that relationship. I gained the best forever family with the folks at CR and the folks at this church. My kids are now proud to say that I'm their dad. My daughter didn't even want me to walk her across this volleyball court one time because I was a drug dealer. But after I got in recovery, I got to walk her up front with her mother. I was honored to lead my son right there to the Lord. We're not here to celebrate recovery. And that was worth it all right there. God led me to start a Celebrate Recovery in Livingston, which is going on its 4th year. Before drug addiction, everything I ever started, I could not finish. I would start something and I wouldn't finish it. In fact, I even started a correspondence Bible class to college one time. You send them thing off and it comes back, and it's just I reckon it's old school internet, post office. And I didn't even finish it. I didn't finish. I had one merit badge to be Eagle Scout, and I didn't finish because of drugs. But he led me to college and helped me graduate Liberty University with an Associate's Arts in Religion, 3.6 GPA at that, and so he really kept my brain here. He led me to start my own business, which allows me time to do ministry work and the finances to do ministry work without having to ask people to help me. Over the years, I had sold and pawned various items: guns, bows, chainsaws, a canoe, and I mean the list goes on. And I can tell you that God has given me everything back that the drugs took from me. Everything. He's blessed me so much. I want you to take this with you. God is active in His creation. He longs to have a relationship with each and every one of us. Not just a Sunday relationship, an everyday, every hour relationship. And He can work miracles in our lives. Seek God's will in your life, every part of it, in your career, your relationships, any decision. Seek His will, His direction for your life. Ask Him to guide you by His Spirit. Listen to what His Spirit says inside you and tells you to do. We live in a society where most people feel dissatisfied. Through seeking worldly freedom, you find yourself in bondage in the things of this world. Yet, our world deceptively tells you to seek after wealth, glory, and other empty dreams. These seem to work for a short time, if at all. Yet we often do not recognize our actual needs. The enemy continues to deceive us by telling us that his poor substitutes will satisfy the cravings inside us. Living under God's authority and His guidance brings way more happiness and peace than the bondage of pleasing yourself and serving this world. You cannot find lasting happiness and satisfaction in money, material wealth, spouse, escaping reality, in drugs and alcohol. It comes only from a growing relationship with Jesus Christ. All of us have an emptiness within, a longing for something more. What are you attempting to satisfy it with? Our hearts are like jigsaw puzzles, and no matter how hard you try to force the wrong piece there, it will never fit correctly. Turn to Jesus. He'll fill that hole. He knows how to fill the missing piece in your heart. If you've never accepted Jesus Christ as your personal Savior, tonight can be the night. And you know, if you've got some part of your life that you realize you need to turn over, tonight can be the night. You don't have to wait. Most of all, I love every single one of y'all. And I love to see everybody I love loving my Jesus.